prior to, well, that was a long time ago. That was like 2018 to 20 and 21. And actually those are sessions that I would love to go back through and listen to myself. But anyway, I'm gonna do that. That is not gonna really change much. I'm still gonna participate in discussion, but and obviously you guys as well. But I'm gonna hand that to him so that there's some congruency there. But let's pray together. Father, we bless your name. We thank you so much for your eternal, unchanging, faithful, perfect love. It defines all of who you are and everything that you do, shapes the way that you do it. And it's this wonderful and beautiful thing that you have us to come to know and receive and experience, but also to grow in and practice and become, even as a measure of your glory. Thank you for that. With your love follows your wisdom. And all of those together, your life in abundance. Pray for the enlightenment of your spirit, the joy of your heart, the peace of your presence to be with us. Folks in the Bible study as well, those participating online. Lord, that our people would become to you a sweet smelling offering with every word, with every deed, and even with every thought and action. We bless your name. Amen.
I think we're on 14, right?
Yep. Come on. Yes.
Okay. Why don't we have Isaac read the first one and then Jaden the second.
Master said, Zhang was home, took the walled city of Feng in order to demand from the Duke of Lu that his half-brother Wei be made his successor. Although he said that he was not trying to force his lord's hand, I do not believe it.
Zhang Wuzhong, as we saw in 1412, was a wise minister in Lu. As a result of machinations by the Ming family, who slandered him to the head of the Ji family, Zhang was forced to flee the state and take refuge in the neighboring state of Zhou. Disturbed that he, as the eldest son in the family, would no longer be able to keep up the sacrifices at the family's ancestral temple in Lu, he sent a message to his half-brother to approach the Duke of Lu and request that one of them be made his official successor. Simultaneously, he re-entered Lu and took possession of the walled city of Feng, which traditionally belonged to his family. Although he denied it at the time, this was clearly an implicit threat. If his request was not granted by the Duke, he would continue to hold Feng in open revolt. The Duke acquiesced, and Zhang Wei, one of Zhang Wuzhong's half-brothers, was appointed successor. Most commentators take the point of this passage to be that, although clever and wise, Zhang Wuzhong was lacking in other moral qualities. A comment attributed to Confucius that concludes the Zhuo commentary account of Zhang Wuzhong's behavior also implicates the potential danger of a single virtue unbalanced by others. This is the potential problem with wisdom. You have someone as wise as Zhang Wuzhong, and yet he is no longer welcome in Lu for a good reason. In his actions, he was not submissive, and he did not apply the virtue of understanding, shu, in his dealings with others. Confucius's refusal here in 1414 to accept Zhang Wuzhong's own account of his behavior also relates to the theme of judging other people's character. You need to look to their actions, not to their words.
Elijah and Benji, read the next one too.
Who reads first?
You go ahead.
Master said, Duke of Wenjin is crafty, but not correct, whereas Duke of Huan of Qi was correct, but not crafty.
Duke Wen reigned as the second of the official hegemons from 1636 to 628 BCE, and Duke Huan reigned as the first of the official hegemons from 681 to 643 BCE. Commentary to 320 and 1416. The traditional explanation of Confucius' judgment is that Duke Wen of Jin arrogantly summoned the Zhao king to make a court visit to him and participate in the hunt, in order to successfully show off his own power and enhance his own prestige, whereas Duke Huan dedicated himself to public duty at the expense of his own interests.
In both these Analects, I'm seeing a recurrent theme of the danger of an incomplete person or incomplete character, especially one which, as each one of these characters were, one that is in a place of example and leadership, especially one that they have settled in as like the fullness of themselves. And I guess what very obviously to me is indicating that they've lost the learning and the student's heart. So what I'm getting at is, when you have a ruler or a minister who has kind of settled into the character that they portray, and when that character has not been brought to a completeness, there's something that's lacking in it, then it doesn't mean that there's nothing good that comes as a result, but that one hole in their character, or that one empty or undeveloped space in their heart, if you will, it grows, or it becomes manifest as the reign or the rule, which is really only the expression of this minister, this ruler's heart, goes on. What has happened at that point with a Zhang Wuzhong or a Duke of Wen, Duke Huan, whoever it is we're looking back at not just an incident, but we're looking back at the course or pattern of an entire life. And what becomes evident in it is that there was not a learning heart, a malleable heart, because there was not the reaching of a complete heart. So reading book 14 without the context of earlier books, where that actually is the primary subject of that importance of self-cultivation, or being cultivated, having or being learned, or shui. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Is a much more important aspect to eventually becoming a ruler or in a place of influence than is immediately obvious when you're just seeing Confucius speaking to disciples who maybe have not quite reached that place of influence yet. Not merely because they consider themselves to be at that time before Confucius disciples or students, but because what Confucius is really doing at that time is instilling in them a pattern that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. They never won't be students of life, in a sense. But what we see with rulers that the master is pointing out as maybe being developed in one area but lacking a lot in the other is that these are men who have stagnated their learning heart. They've plateaued at a place where they don't learn. They're no longer refined. They're no longer ascending that mountain of learning, which is very evident in the incompleteness of their character. So this is not the only book that Confucius does so, but when we see these points in which, or these many Analects in which Confucius is drawing an example from a character, one that kind of seems to balance itself out a little bit, because he doesn't just point out bad qualities, he's also pointing out strengths in these people. It still remains not as just a neutral case study, but as a warning to his disciples, because, I mean, as we see with some of his disciples, like Zixia, or the one we know really well, but for some reason I'm forgetting his name. Zilu, yeah. And then you have Yan Hui.
I know.
You have people that even in their time of discipleship, so this is kind of the early period of their growth as individuals, you see what has come to be formed in them as very obvious strengths and very obvious weaknesses. And there is actually an Analect a couple that we've looked at together, I think some months ago, where Confucius is saying the gentleman will always be sure to point out the strengths, but he'll also be sure to note, not harp on, but to note, very wisely discern the weaknesses or the shortcomings. Especially when you have a discipling influence in a disciple's life. And so, with examples like we just read, there is I am sensing a pretty distinct warning on Confucius' part as to the result of losing the student heart, losing the ability or even the intuition that really should be carried all throughout life, to learn from life, to never stop learning. Like, that actually takes you back to the very first Analect, when he says to learn and then have occasion to practice what you have learned. Is this not satisfying? He also says to have friends who arrive from afar. It's kind of like a side-by-side with just how deep and profound a joy it is to see what you have learned diligently put into practice. To have friends arrive from afar, is this not a joy? To be patient even when others do not understand, is this not the mark of the gentleman? I'm actually very excited to get started in our other side of our exploration of Chinese culture, because we will be revisiting a lot of what is introduced early in the book as far as what it looks like to be a good student. That's not something that should ever be forgotten as you go through any part of this book. Because whether he's doing so explicitly or implicitly, Confucius is always reminding his students of that. Is there anything else you guys noticed?
I was just thinking about a statement that he said in 1414, where it's talking about the danger of certain things when there is an imbalance in virtues. And just the first thought that came to my mind when reading that was kind of the fact that, you know, he ended it with how things need to be put into practice, and that's the highlight, right? So for me, that was kind of resonating in a way where I feel like putting things into practice is like the virtue that balances all of them out, right? Because it can be applied to every single one of them. And every single virtue is still a virtue, but it doesn't really produce anything until obviously you learn to put it into practice and apply it to life. So it doesn't even become anything until it's balanced with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you could say that that is one of the balancing virtues, learning to apply it. Just a thought.
This reminds me of what I think stands out as my absolute favorite Analect. And despite it being my absolute favorite, I do not remember where it is. Hey, wait. Found it. Yes, I have it bookmarked. We've looked at this before. But it carries so much in it that I think you could read it a dozen times and only get a fraction of what it has to offer. This is 17:8 on page 203. There you go. That's because this was...
Notes.
Oh, yeah? Well, remember some months ago, I guess I kind of received a bit of a revelation. I have not even recalled this whole time until just now, that the love of learning, which we'll see is like this mediating factor to all other virtues, is equivalent with, it is actually one with death to self. So reading 17:8. The master said, "Zulu, have you heard about the 6 virtuous words and their 6 corresponding vices?" Zulu replied, "I have not. Sit and I will tell you about them." As Kongangwa explains, Zulu had stood up to answer the master as required by ritual, and therefore the master tells him to take a seating. There's a bit of a pomp and circumstance preceding this very important animal. Loving goodness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of foolishness. Loving wisdom without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of deviance. Loving trustworthiness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of harmful rigidity. Loving uprightness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of intolerance. Loving courage without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of unruliness. Loving resoluteness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of willfulness. I guess it would be worth reading the commentary just to give more context. The 6 words are the 6 virtues named, each paired with an attendant vice or obscuration. Learning is presented as a force able to restrain or regulate the inherent emotional stuff of human beings, which would tend towards excess if left to develop on its own. Reference 8.2, or the restraining force, is ritual. The discipline provided by training in ritual and traditional cultural forms allows one to reshape one's native substance and hit on the mean of virtue. The description of the 6 virtuous words and their attendant vices is reminiscent of Aristotle's discussion of the virtues and their excesses and deficiencies. Aristotle describes his virtues as the mean, mesotes or whatever, as the mean point between 2 extremes. Truthfulness and straightforwardness, for instance, is the mean between the vice of excess or boastfulness and the vice of deficiency or self-deprecation. Although Confucius discusses his virtues in pairs, the virtue and its excess, when not restrained by the rites or learning, rather than triads, the virtues and its excess and deficiency, the basic conceptual structure of the mean in Chinese zhong, or the center of an archery target, see how it all comes together in this? Is very similar, based as it is on the metaphor of a physical continuum with extreme ends or edges and a desirable midpoint.
That writing that I just gave you about the tree of faith is all about an illustration of archery.
Oh, I only read the supplement.
Hitting the mark on several different levels or in successive levels, which is learning and maturity and growth, expansion. One of the things that really stood out to me on this one was that in kind of pairing up with what would bring someone to a point in life where they may not, it's not about a cognitive thought that you have, which is, I don't need to learn anymore. It's not like you actually think that thought. But what brings you to a place where you stop learning, where that's not your perspective or, your posture toward everything that you engage in or experience. And I think it's all implied here. In 1414, like Benji mentioned, the danger of a single virtue unbalanced by others. There's a potential for a particular virtue in life to cast a shadow on that which is lacking. So it's almost like you can't see it. So you become self-deceived in that you've achieved something. And then once you, in your inner person, in your way of thinking, you believe you've achieved something, you also correspondingly believe that what you do is right. And so you can't see your fault. And further, you defend your actions, which is very interesting related to 1414, because he says, although he said that he was not trying to force his Lord's hand, I do not believe it. Well, the whole point that Confucius was making in bringing up the instance was to point out that not just this guy's a liar, but he doesn't even see himself. So the great deficiency is not seen by the person. And so when you're not postured to be a student of life, of people, of relationships, then you even lose your own motive. Your motive is, you're deceived by your own motive. You defend it. You actually go from teachable to not just not learning anymore, but becoming unteachable. And that is a very terrible place to be. You can't teach someone who doesn't want to learn. And you certainly can't teach someone who thinks that they already know. You can't. There has to be, that's where contriteness and humility are not simply about a lowly form of posture, but of a willingness to learn, to always learn. That's true contriteness. And humility then enters in to any scenario with the possibility that there is something to learn from it. before it ever plays out. It's a default. So I don't know if that ties the two Analects together, because in both cases something was missing from each one. And so, in one sense, to be crafty is to manipulate, to arrange things so that you can do what you intend. But there is also a lack of wisdom when you do things the right way, but at a cost that isn't necessary. So in this, we can at least see that there is, I don't like calling the mean a middle ground, because it's not a compromise. And that's been spoken of in other Analects with the, I don't know if that was an Analect or not, but the imagery of the archery and overshooting and undershooting. Somehow I remember that wasn't an Analect, that was something from maybe Mencius or something. But I don't know.
Ones of both.
Anyway, it's a principle. Yeah, I think it was in both, but I haven't read as much Mencius. Anyway, hitting the mark is hitting the mark. Missing it is missing it, whether it's overshot or undershot. So therefore, the mark is not a compromise. It is a central truth at which we aim. And so, I of course am always intrigued by the language that's used here in, I guess what it was at 17:8. The center of an archery, the mean being the center of an archery target. That always is fascinating to me, in that the Torah and the Pentateuch were, they were basically the direct meaning of that instruction was to instruct so as to hit the mark, is the literal meaning of the Torah. So you can hear even David communicating with Solomon in reference to his adherence to the way of wisdom in order to achieve this high mark. Anyway, so interesting correlations there. Another encouragement I have for you guys in general, as it relates to continuing to discuss and read Analects, I may have mentioned this before, but when you're studying the words of a wise man, do not pay attention only to the things he says, but learn how to see and think in the way that he thinks. Doesn't really matter if you remember this instance that Confucius talks about. What perspective and or wisdom did the master, in this sense, carry to be able to make that observation of someone else? That's behind his works. That's where his understanding is. That's the lens through which he views others in his life. And you guys need to develop that lens. The lens of wisdom, the perception and vision, and that sight that wisdom and other qualities of God's nature and spirit have, through which you see all things. I'm admiring Elijah's Chinese over here.
Just thinking out loud, I am recalling just how interesting the balance is, and I very intentionally use the word balance, between the Confucian school of thought and what developed as an actual school, but still had adherents before it actually became a known school. These adherents lived during Confucius' time as primitivists, but the balance between Confucius' school and what became known as the Taoist school. And that is that the Confucians, or the gentlemen, what are they called again? Junsa, I think.
What are you referring to?
What it looked like to be a complete Confucian gentleman. I think that's what they were called. Like, the opinion is Junzi, I think.
ZEI?
No, Z, just ZI. Anyways,
Junzi.
what I am seeing, and I really am thinking out loud here, so my thoughts are a bit incomplete, is that you had a lot of reflection and self-knowing and analysis in the Confucian school. I mean, that's the very first thing that's mentioned in that phrase we've become very familiar with from The Great Learning, where it says, first I learned about the world around me, then I learned about myself, and going on and on until you bring peace to the world. You have self-reflection, self-cultivation, but much of what the movement and direction of Confucian teaching is very positive. It's always building something. It's ascending to some point. But in what is a pretty down to earth and practical way. And what Confucius did is bring that as a possibility, as something accessible to all people, even if you were a common person, when before it was just something given to rulers, to those who were aspiring unto rulership. So he made it universal. With the Taoists, and this is why I think the Analects are probably overall more helpful to look at. The Taoists were very much about the uncarved block, if you guys remember that metaphor, about reaching or returning to that place of the blank slate, of returning to what is called in the Analects the native substance, to the point where that very quickly and easily became an idolized thing, I think, in the Tao school, where that became the end of the matter rather than the beginning of it, as it is properly so in the Confucian teaching. But there is, I think, a very valuable enhancement that very early Taoist thought offers, as far as that necessity to return to a place of forgetting, letting go of the old ways, the inherent or adopted or inherited, I guess is what I'm trying to say, ways of thinking. Remember that silly metaphor that I have not actually thought about refining yet, where I was talking about the molds or the shapes by which we allow everything to be passed into us, processed by us. Much of what the movement of the Taoist thought is breaking those down. So as opposed to the Confucian thought, it's very negative in a good way, not like negative bad, but like negative in that it's dissolving things. And no, I'm not doing anything special by trying to like reconcile the two schools. That people have been doing that for a very long time. Actually, they were called esoterics. No, eccentrics is what they were called. Where you had people that tried to see the similarities between Confucian school, Taoist school, and many times actually Buddhism as well, which is also has a very negative, dissolving, let go of everything kind of thrust. But I'm interested to see where we're taken in that side of things, which I see is as working very much into this regulating place that something like the love of learning, even the death of self, has in everything we do learn, everything in us that needs adjustment, everything in us that needs to remain in a malleable or pliable state, so that we're not, as we spoke of earlier, plateauing in some finished state or acceptable to us state of character or being or state of heart. This love of learning, as I believe death to self is an attitude that your heart has. So the reason I mention this is because you don't see something like the sentiment of, or the attitude often carried with death to self in the Analects, but it is very prevalent in something like the Tao Te Ching, where that the self and desire, things of that kind, are things that actually lead to incompleteness. It leads to a lack of harmony and naturalness in your being and character. But learning to let go of and dismiss the self and its impulse overall is something that will allow you to enter into, kind of serves as the beginning of the natural and the true self, the complete self. Anyways, I'm interested to see how that will play into what we'll all be looking at, but we could try to read the next one. I actually think the next two again are very similar. Could probably be read as in one entire Analect. So I guess I could pick 4 people to read now. Naomi, you can read the first one. And I guess I'll read the second one. And then after that, Elijah can read the third one, and then Benji the fourth.
Probably gonna need help with names, but yeah.
Try your best.
Zulu.
Zulu said, when Duke Han had his brother Prince Zhu murdered, Xiao Hu died for his master, whereas Shan Zhaorong did not.
What? Go ahead, sorry.
I know.
He then added, "Does this behavior not fall short of goodness?" The master replied, "It was Zhang Zong's strength that allowed Duke
I didn't even.
On many occasions.
I did.
to harmoniously unite the feudal lords without the use of military force. But as for his goodness, I'm confused."
Both Duke Huan, then merely Prince Xiaobo, and his elder brother, Prince Zhu, had been in exile from Qi, the latter having taken refuge in Lu under the protection of his retainers Shaohu and Guanzhong. When Duke Xiang, the older brother of both Zhu and Xiaobo, died, Xiaobo managed to get back to Qi before his brother and seize control of the state. In order to consolidate his position, he then demanded that the Duke of Lu execute his brother and send the two retainers back to Qi. In his grief and out of a sense of loyalty to his master, Xiaohu refused to return to Qi and instead killed himself. Guanzhong, on the other hand, willingly returned and eventually became the newly established Duke Huan's prime minister. Zulu clearly disapproves of this behavior and expects Confucius to share his moral outrage. Beginning with Kong and Guo, the standard interpretation of Confucius's final assessment, Uchiren, literally like his goodness, has been to understand it either with an implicit who before it, who could match his goodness, or as in the sense of such was his goodness. Such high praise has caused consternation among commentators, considering the negative attitudes expressed toward Guanzhong in 322, as well as the fact that he was serving a hegemon rather than a legitimate king. Musher follows Kong and Guo, but tries to explain away the contradiction by adding probably what he meant is that though Guanzhong was not quite a truly good person, his beneficence is extended to all people, and therefore his achievements were good. A more satisfying way to reconcile 14, 16, and 17 with 322 is to follow commentators who understand Rushiren like the that man in 14.9 as a non-committal, but as for his goodness, as for his goodness.
What does that mean?
Just immediately read the next one.
Yeah.
Zedong asked, Guanzhong was not a good person, was he? When Duke Huan had Prince Jiu murdered, Guanzhong was not only incapable of dying with his master, he moreover turned around and served his master's murderer as prime minister. The master replied, when Guanzhong served as Duke Huan's prime minister, he allowed him to become hegemon over the other feudal lords, uniting and ordering the entire world. To this day, the people continue to enjoy the benefits of his achievements. If it were not for Guanzhong, we would all be wearing our hair loose and fastening our garments on the left. How could he be expected to emulate the petty fidelity of a common husband or wife, going off to hang himself and die anonymously in some gully or ditch?
Wearing the hair loose and fastening one's clothes on the left are both barbarian practices. Guanzhong is credited with helping Qi to unite the Chinese feudal lords, and thereby preventing the Di barbarians from overrunning China. Confucius's point is thus that all Chinese of his age owe Guanzhong a debt for saving them from having been born as subjects of alien, barbarian masters. The petty fidelity of a commoner is perceived as arising from their strict monogamy.
Monogamy.
What does that mean?
Being married to one person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A commoner not being able to afford the upkeep of concubines. As Leggy puts it, Confucius's retort is essentially, do you think Guanzhong should have considered himself bound to Jiu? As a common man considers himself bound to his wife, and would have had him commit suicide, as common people will do on any slight occasion? This echoes the concern with overly rigid or narrowly understood trustworthiness expressed in 113, 1318, 1320, and 17:8. There is some debate over whether or not Confucius is entirely excusing Guanzhong's behavior after the murder of his lord. But in any case, it is clear that in Confucius's view, Guanzhong later achievements greatly outweigh any potential initial impropriety.
Naomi, for like the ending part, the reason that's kind of confusing is because it is left intentionally ambiguous. I don't know if the 1417 made sense, but it's essentially saying that Confucius recognized that he did good things later with his life, and so for whether or not that initial decision was good, he kind of left that intentionally ambiguous. I think maybe because he thinks it doesn't matter because he did good later.
Thank you.
If you're wondering, yeah, what, like, he actually looks like, or is the kind of attitude he's expressing when he says, but as for his goodness, he's like kind of, but as for his goodness, like that kind of thing, you know what I'm saying? Is that what you were?
Yeah, I was just wondering why it was repeated.
They did
Yeah.
the same thing with another line. I think it actually mentioned it.
That man.
That man,
Yeah.
yeah.
You guys understand what a hegemon is?
Mini ruler.
It's someone who basically rules through their capable force and not necessarily because there was a formal passing of authority. So,
But also not quite as king either.
well, that would be formal.
Sure, okay.
So, a hegemon is someone who rules by the strength of their own power.
I see.
So,
I think, yeah, formality is one thing, but hegemon is kind of what it's almost synonymous with like being a dictator. So it is definitely having to do with force, but you could have been formally put in a place of rulership, but still rule as a hegemon.
I
That's the
see.
thing.
yeah, it's a combo of both. So, but that's why there's the dispute about Guangzhong's what he did was right or wrong, because he gave way to a power that was exercised in a wrong way. But you know, the amiable or the admirable aspect of what he did was that he used the continuation of his life and position with this new ruler as a means to help make decisions that would be better for the people. And so Confucius is talking about the disparity of taking your own life because you're so committed to your leader when they died, versus using your life for something that's greater than those types of commitments. So he looks more admirably on that. But that doesn't mean that because he did that he was, essentially a good man in the way that they describe goodness, There's a lot about that scenario that we don't really know. We don't know if he was afraid for his life and that's why he did it, and then he changed and did better things afterwards, or all of that's kind of left in the dark there. maybe these guys had more context to it, but I don't know that we do, unless there's another account that's more detailed.
I think it's also it's related to Guangzhong, like with that being a ambiguous decision, but I also think it's pointing out kind of how foolish Xiao Hu was with his excessive uprightness. That 1318, where it was the father who stole a sheep and then the son reported them to the authorities.
Right.
It's just, that is the
A
vice.
little over the top.
Exactly, that is the vice talked about with trustworthy or uprightness not balanced with a love of learning. Is that that insistence on what is right, almost to the point where it's not even what is right, but it's what you view as right in your own stubbornness, to often either your or others' detriment.
Yeah. So like another example in this particular situation could be, that who was the guy that took his own life?
Xiao Hu?
Xiao Hu honored his master and therefore took his life. But you could say, in a certain sense, that Guangzhong honored his master's ways by continuing them with his life.
Mm-hmm.
And what's greater? One has a greater impact over others. So, go ahead.
Yeah, with bringing up an example of a historical figure again, as in this case, Confucius students are, I don't even know necessarily what their motivation is when they're bringing up something like this to Confucius. I don't think it's to try to catch them or put them in a corner. I think they're sincere in
What's
their
real honor
inquiry.
seems to be the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what they seem to be forgetting is that virtue and goodness don't always take the same appearance, but they want to point out cases in which their idea of what some virtue, in particular goodness, looks like doesn't seem to match what took place with a specific person and what they did. And even though he doesn't directly say this, Confucius is basically implying, and he has said this outright on other occasions, it's their way that matters. It's their way that will allow them to exercise virtue, allow them to exercise goodness at all, really, and not as some shell of an idea of what they legalistically understood virtue and goodness to look like, based off as if it is merely a thing based on precedent. So this is what this person did in this situation, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Confucius said it's never worked that way. This is like the mentioned example of the four different rulers, and each having been put in the same situation but doing different things, but all having the same way. And so, yes, we see here that there is a very narrow view on drawing an example from people of the past, which Confucius himself did a lot. So are the students doing the same thing. Hey, this is an example of a virtuous person. This is an example of a person that was not good, right? And Confucius is saying you're approaching it from a really static and pretty ignorant way, because Confucius is not advocating for this like all's well that ends well idea of things, where yeah, he may have done some bad things at first, but it all turned out great. I mean, it kind of seems like that's what he's saying, but I think it's more so a perspective of there's a way, there's a mean by which virtue is practiced. It doesn't simply follow virtuous action. It precedes it. It goes before it. And that's what I think the students very often missed. It's easy thing to miss when it's mostly in your head, not really in your heart.
I enjoy when Confucius corrects. It's not that he's just correcting one presentation of the way they think about something. He's correcting both. You know, he always has this other answer implied, which is not in either direction that you typically think. And it's not because he's a nonconformist thinker. It's because, nor is it simply because he's an abstract thinker. He's thinking from an entirely different perspective. You know, people tend to think in dichotomies. You know, it's either black or white. And, you know, it's actually can be viewed very differently from a different perspective that's not about black or white. There's a whole nother principle involved. And I'm thinking of this, one of the primary examples that sticks in my mind with this is when Zulu first comes in and he's learning music and he's not that good at it. And so they think, oh look, it means he's not a real cultured guy or whatever. And you know, while you could understand why they would think that, he actually thinks very differently about the way Zulu does things because of his perspective of the person and the situation that they're in, where they're coming from. All of those factors are a part of his view of an individual's, the way that he sees what someone is pursuing or going after, and then thereby the way that they make decisions or act. And so that even goes to the previous Analect that we were just looking at. He's like, you know, he says he didn't do it for this reason, but I don't think so. You know, I don't know that I really agree with that because he just has this very intriguing way. It's fascinating. I think it's something, again, that is really worth studying. And you're not gonna learn it by memorizing Analects and Confucius words. You're gonna learn it by understanding how he looked at things, the lens through which he viewed what he did. And that, I'm not saying that to learn something from Confucius directly per se, so much as to learn to look at life, situations, relationships, various scenarios, and decisions in that way. Because it's a completely different wisdom applied to life. And you will find that is, if you go back to other wisdom literature, like the wisdom literature that we have in Scripture, you will see that that's the same orientation of thought that is there. It's the same root of perspective. And that'll mean a lot for the way that life is understood and lived. The way that you love, the way that you treat others, the way that you perceive yourself. Very differently.
All right. Kayla, do you want to pray for us?
Sure. Father, I thank you for this time that we got this morning with one another. I thank you what you are continuing to teach us through relationships and how to be a good student. I pray for our time in the Chinese culture class today. I pray that the good things that were spoken here can be linked to our next class. I thank you so much for Noah and Tim's heart to help us understand this. You are so good to us, Father. I cannot express in my own words how thankful I am to be living this life that you have given me. I continue to pray for the rest of our day and our time tonight, and that you would bless it and be in this time with us. We just invite you to
be here in our culture center, and you be the culture that we are trying to follow. I thank you for this day, and I thank you for the people you're surrounding us with. Amen.